Well, welcome to another audio archive. This is Marcia Sinitar. I hope you'll enjoy what was a very long, personalized seminar for psychologists and spiritual directors and people who were qualified to teach the book Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics. It's online, the book, and I hope you'll look for it. You can get it for pennies, I think now. It's used. But if you're qualified as a group leader, life coach, or whatever your profession, the book will flesh out some of the details that I talk about on this seminar, this audio of a seminar. Now, you're going to hear that it's been edited, but I know that it makes as much sense, at least to me, today as it did back when I was recording it. And you're going to hear a very young voice, because I was very young at the time when I did this. And you'll hear references to dates and references to books. One of the movies that I mentioned up front is called Education of Rita. You can find that online. I think it's on Amazon. I think it's a video. You can either stream it or you can rent it or buy it. I hope you'll find it, just as I hope you'll find the book, and enjoy.
So then the purpose tonight is to talk about this idea of adult spiritual emergence. And I want to acknowledge the fact that much of the remarks that I'm going to say are already in the book Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, which is, a Paulus Press publication. And I've been doing research since 80s, the early 80s, on adults of all ages and all types, men and women, from about 18 through their 80s, who have been called, I call it a summons, I'm not the only one, they feel an interior invitation to be more fully human. And I'd like to talk about that summons tonight. And then in the next session, this is a two-part series, and then in the next session, talk a little bit about our individual response. Our response to this summons is always unique and sometimes radical and sometimes not. And the thing that we human beings have a tendency to do is to want to make a rule about everything. But for this spiritual emergence, my sense is that we can look for patterns, but it's important not to be Pharisees, pharisaical about it, and have a legalistic attitude. First we go through this stage, and then this stage, and then this stage, because even as we look at young children who are spiritually inclined, and I'll talk specifically about what I mean by spirituality in just a bit, what we see in those children is that they tend to be their own. It's as if they have a loyalty to some inner core, some inner authenticity. And the interesting thing about adults who are emerging spiritually is that very often they have some backing up to do. It's like, when you're swimming and you try to tread water, sometimes you have to move your feet backwards. And the backward movement is part of the summons. So for this session, I wanted to discuss that radical inner call. I thought before discussing this in detail, I'd like to give some examples and kind of bring it into the concrete. Everything I'm going to say in these two series is designed to talk about the practical aspects so that you can assess yourself, take a reading and say, where am I on this path? And one of the things about emerging spiritually as adults is that we don't stop when we begin. It is an ongoing unfolding. And sometimes I think the tendency is to think oh, I've done that repair, or I've done this bit of forward movement, and so now I'm done. My sense is that the deeper you go within, the more authentically we respond, the more we want to. So this is great desire, this yearning. But yearning for what? That's the question. And this is the quiz that I think we all ask ourselves. What is it that I feel stirring inside that moves me so much, that makes me let go of the things that other people perhaps have felt were important? First example I wanted to talk about in this longing is the film, The Education of Rita. Maybe some of you remember seeing that movie. It's a very delightful and really profound in many ways. And although Education of Rita is about a young woman who feels an urge to learn more and to leave the narrow confines of her marriage, not so much to leave her husband, but to leave the role that she has adopted for herself. I think there are many ways that we can make the parallel, and we see the parallel to the spiritual life. And what we find in Rita is a young woman, as I say, who experiences herself as wanting something more refined. She wants a life that is not this blue-collar life that her husband and her family have always had. She's not snobbish about it. I don't sense this in the character, but rather she wants to learn about good literature and good poetry. She wants to be able to pronounce words properly. She wants her professor, whom she goes to for tutoring, to hold her to a tough standard. She doesn't want him feeling sorry for her. And I think in many ways, for example, when she reads Macbeth for the first time, she comes flying into his classroom. The tutorials that she has are one-on-ones. And she comes into his classroom and he's there with 30 or 40 people having a regular formal class, and he thinks there's something wrong. And she calls him out into the hall, and what he hears her say is how exciting Macbeth is. She's just electrified. She's thrilled with Shakespeare. This is the first time she's ever heard Shakespeare. And in the same way, I think we're electrified, we're turned on to the sense that something in us, something different is happening, and we want to refine this knowledge. So I think the first part about the summons is that it's a hunger. William Law calls it the hunger of the soul. And he says that the hunger of the soul is all that's needed, because everything else happens from that. So it's not to say we don't use our good judgment and that we don't use our rationality, because these are gifts too, but rather that we don't let the intellect run the heart, and that we make the desires of the mind the desires of the heart. This is blending, lovely spontaneous blending. So in sum, I would say that one of the ways we block ourselves is by too much suspicion and wondering, is this way better, is that way better? Psychologizing, oh, if this and that hadn't happened, I would be there, and so forth. Why am I doing this? And what does this mean now? All of that is really can get in our way. And the summons means that we do die to ourselves as we have always known ourselves. And that's part of that social transcendence and self-transcendence that I was speaking about. The second major way that I think we block ourselves, I know I certainly do, is I would call it a failure of nerve or a purpose or commitment. This is a very subtle, this is much more subtle, because you could be a committed person. You could have, for example, a marriage, a long-standing marriage, or you could be in the same job for many years, or you could have gone to the same church all of your life, and on the surface it all looks correct. On paper, as we say, you're committed. But on the other hand, in some little sneaky place in you, there could be a holding back. It's this withhold. It's another form of resistance. And we get sidetracked, for example, by distractions. I know people who are marvelous church attenders. They go every single Sunday. I know people who celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday, and their phone is off the hook on Saturday, and these are just charming people. But I also know that in conversations I've had with these individuals, these are friends, we've discussed how easy it is to get on a merry-go-round of activities during the week, so that you never once listen inwardly. And prayer life is just gone. Meditation is gone. You're up early taking care of other people's needs and maybe your own needs, and by the end of the week, when it comes time for the Sabbath, whichever day is your Sabbath, it's just totally spent. And sometimes a sign of this failure can be seen in our lukewarm approach to life, and even frequent failures. And this is so interesting. I mean, for me, ways that we sabotage our heart's desire especially to answer that summons. Now here I chose to, as my example, Le Carré, one of my favorite authors, in the book The Russia House, and also I think in the movie, but you wouldn't get the sense of this in the movie, only in the book, what I'm going to describe, where Le Carré is talking about his hero, Barley. I think in the movie, Sean Connery, who's one of my favorites, plays Barley. So you can kind of, I'm giving you that so you can get a visualization of him. He's sitting on the sidelines most of his life. He's been promiscuous with women. He has a publishing business which he is marginally successful. He loves Russia and he goes frequently, but he's just one of these men that he's not really jumping into the stream of life. And early in the novel, one of the interrogators who's evaluating Barley, the hero, for Secret Service work, looks at his profile and his history in the dossier that they have. And what he says is that I found Barley had so many headlong crashes, acts of seeming self-destruction, so little prudence. This is the interrogator talking about what he finds. He says, Barley has a frightful school record. His expulsion for being drunk while attending church at school, he was flogged and then expelled. I'm paraphrasing, and now I'm going to read from it. How convenient, thought the interrogator, for him and for me, if I could have pointed to some great crime that haunted him, some act of cowardice or omission. But I'd seen his entire life, secret annexes and all, medical history, money, women, wives, children, and all of it was small stuff, all the way. No big bang, no big crime, no big anything, which may have been the explanation of him. Was it for want of a greater sea that he repeatedly wrecked himself against life's little rocks, challenging his maker to come up with something bigger or stop bothering him? I thought that was just a fantastic line. I'm going to read it again. He says, was it for want of a greater sea that he repeatedly wrecked himself against life's little rocks, challenging his maker to come up with something bigger or stop bothering him? Would he be so headlong when faced with greater odds? I think that we are looking for something challenging, but it takes something from us, especially if we've heard the summons. Last week I was listening to an interview with one of the foremost, a foremost playwright whose name I really cannot remember. He's a very old man now in his 80s, and he was on the interviewed by Bill Moyers on the Creativity series, and he was complaining a little bit or maybe nostalgic about what he had accomplished in his life. And he said that he wondered if he said he knew he had the depth of feeling, and he knew that he had the skill to write. He thought he was a tremendous craftsman. And then he had this little throwaway sentence, and I thought of this that I just read to you. He said, I wonder if I had enough of the heroic impulse. He said, I think I certainly looked at myself when he said that, and I said to myself, do I have enough of the heroic impulse? Everyone who hears the summons, it takes a tremendous heroic impulse to commit, because there are no guarantees, and we are called out to be more of who we are in in a world that is, at least in Western culture, for secular persons, we are taught from day one to strive for structure, strive for guarantees, look for money, and look at the culture that we live in now. It's gone berserk. It's not enough to have a car, you have to have a new car or 2 cars. Not enough to have a home or 2 homes, and not enough one person's working in the family, 2 are working, and now the kids are working, and so on and so on and so on. So I think this idea of having a heroic impulse is worth our scrutiny. And in our moments alone, I know many of you drove a long distance to be here. For me, when I drive, these are the kinds of questions I like to run by myself. And certainly this is one. The third way that we block ourselves is even more extreme. It's a kind of deadness. It's a deadness so that we don't even acknowledge that we are being summoned. And this, I fear, is the condition of most of humankind. The example that I brought, and all 3 of these that I've brought tonight are either film or literary. This is from an otherwise mediocre little novel. I read a lot of mysteries, so I come up with 1 or 2 good things from these mysteries. This one is from something called The Stark Truth, which I can't really recommend unless you're traveling and stranded in an airport, and then it'll hold your attention for a little while. And here the heroine, she's trying to describe to a man who's courting her why she doesn't want to marry him. And she's describing the people that have been in her life. And as I was reading this, I thought, that sounds like a lot of people. It's not just in this woman's experience. But I thought it was very interesting that the man that wrote this, he's writing about a woman, but he's speaking about a very universal set of qualities. So she says, talking to the hero, my point is, I won't marry you because I see too much of my former husband in you. There are ways in which you are dead, and she was saying that her husband was just a dead person. Tommy, you are dead, with your life only half over. You don't need to tell me, you don't need me to tell you. Your career, the way it's worked out, it's pretty much going nowhere. 1 failed marriage, children you don't particularly care about, not enough money, I'd guess, though you try to hide that. Already you drink too much. It's not that you don't have any fun. You're witty, you're lively, you're sexy, but it's all dabbling. You dabble with women, for instance. You even dabble with me. Now the hero says, her boyfriend says, I wouldn't call it dabbling. And she says, call it what you will, she said, cutting me off. It's dabbling to me. No risk, no responsibility, no ambition. It's as though you'd already given up, dead in that sense, even before you'd started. Okay, this is harsh, but you remember I said earlier that the summons is our call to more life. So I think we have to understand that life, truth, love, vitality, health, enthusiasm, joy, these are the calls. And what we're going to be sacrificing is the deadness. And this, I can't understand why we won't sacrifice. This is the great mystery.